Hey guys, it's time for my full review for the Apple iPhone 6. I've had the device for a little over a week now. I've been using it as my daily driver, so I've got a pretty good understanding of the device features and what it has to offer. So yeah, let's go ahead and check it out. So we'll start off with the look and feel, and firstly, nothing really radical has changed in the overall design. It still has that Apple iPhone look with the physical home button situated at the bottom and the slit earpiece at the top. Of course, the 6 is larger than the previous model. It houses a larger 4.7-inch display. There are some slight revisions to the design. The corners are more rounded and so are the sides, and while that makes it more comfortable in the palm, it actually makes the device more slippery than the previous iPhone 5S, which of course had squarer edges, so you might want to buy a case if you have trouble holding onto your phones. The iPhone 6 is also incredibly thin, coming in at 6.9mm, and for a metal build it's extremely light too, weighing only 129 grams. And if anyone's wondering, no, I haven't had any bend gate issues with this device. As always, this feels like a very premium product in the hand. The buttons feel sturdy and give a nice tactile feedback when pushed. The power button is no longer at the top, it's moved to the right hand side, so it's easier to push when holding the device one-handed, and you also have the SIM card tray there as well. On the bottom you have your headphone jack and lightning port, and on the right hand side you also have the speaker grill. On the back of the device we have these white strips. Those are actually antenna strips to help with signal, although to be honest they look a little bit ugly, and signal strength pretty much has been normal for me. Now because the device is so thin, the camera actually sticks out, which you can see here, meaning if you put it on the table, the camera will be the first thing to make contact with the table. I believe the camera does have a sapphire covering, so it should be pretty durable, but it's definitely more in harm's way when it's protruding out like that. Now the overall footprint of the device is about as big as a Nexus 5, which actually has a 4.99-inch screen. The reason for that is the iPhone 6 has larger bezels on the top and bottom due to housing a physical button, so it actually has one of the largest footprints for a 4.7-inch display. Now Apple finally gave us a meaningful increase to the screen size, bumping it up to 4.7 inches. It has what Apple calls a Retina HD display. Now what that actually means is it has a resolution of 1334 by 750, which is a little above 720p, and it has a PPI of 326, which is the same as the iPhone 5S. Now while it doesn't have a full HD screen like the iPhone 6 Plus, it has excellent color reproduction and high contrast, making photos look vivid and bright. Websites also looked good on the display, although when I put it next to the HTC One, I did notice it wasn't quite as sharp as the M8, but that's probably only something you'd notice if you'd put the devices side by side and compared. Otherwise I don't think you'd have much of an issue here. Overall, it's just nice to see the iPhone get a larger display. Watching YouTube or movies is so much more enjoyable over previous models. I was a little bit disappointed to see the iPhone 6 Plus getting the full HD display and not the 6, because I think that just would have made it an absolute killer display, but it's still going to do the job really well, and one of the areas where it absolutely excels is in the brightness. It's one of the brightest screens you can get on the market. I never really put it over halfway brightness when I was indoors, and putting it on max brightness indoors is just completely overkill. But it makes for great outdoor viewing. I could easily see the iPhone 6 outside on a sunny day. Of course you still get some glare here and there, but it really was easy to see the content without having to find shade or anything like that. Touch ID is included. It comes buried within the home button, so for added security you can use the fingerprint scanner to secure your device. And finally, Apple included NFC in the new iPhones, but it's locked down to Apple Pay. You can't use it for anything else like pairing devices or sending content. And seeing as Apple Pay right now is pretty much non-existent, at least in the UK, it's next to useless, so hopefully that'll change soon. The iPhone 6 is running iOS 8 out the box. Visually not too much has changed. There's a slight redesign to the control center. You also have an extra row of applications on your home screen. And yes, they've also added widgets. Now, they're only available in the drop-down shade, not the home screens, and right now not many apps are taking advantage of these. I've got a fair few apps installed, but it's only Dropbox that has a widget. Personally, I don't think this is as good an implementation as Android has, and I personally don't think I would use them. But yeah, the widgets are here if you do fancy giving them a shot. Apple have now updated the keyboard to support predictive text. I know what you're thinking, how has it taken this long? And they've also opened up the keyboard API, so you can now use third-party keyboards like SwiftKey, and you can gesture type to your heart's content. That being said, I've been having loads of issues with third-party keyboards on iOS 8. They seem buggy and they'll sometimes crash and suddenly go back to the old keyboard, or they'll just leave you without a keyboard whatsoever, so just be aware of that. The Spotlight Universal Search has been updated. I actually really like this feature on iOS. I can just pull down on any home screen and search for nearly anything. It pulls in information from the App Store, web searches, and also information from the device itself, so it really is a universal search. One of the stranger features added is the one-handed mode. You can activate it by double tapping the home button. This will move the contents of the screen down so you can reach it easily with one hand. Honestly, I don't think I'd use this. It seems ugly and a little clunky to me and just not very Apple-like. It doesn't always activate first time either, but it's there if you want it. Moving on to performance, the iPhone 6 comes with Apple's latest A8 system on a chip. It's a dual-core 1.4GHz CPU accompanied by 1GB of RAM. The general UI speed is smooth as we come to expect from Apple devices. The app opening speed, while quick, doesn't feel like a major improvement over the 5S to me. Scrolling in most apps is buttery smooth, although in some occasions on Facebook you can see some drop frames. I'm thinking that's more of a Facebook coding issue though rather than anything else. Messing around with Google Earth, which is a pretty intense app and requires a strong processor to render smoothly, the iPhone 6 does really well. It only drops a few frames here and there, but generally it's very smooth and enjoyable to use. I had no issues with websites rendering either. If you have a strong connection, you should be loading web pages very quickly on the iPhone 6. Scrolling is smooth as you'd expect, but I'm still not a fan of the slow fling scrolling on iOS. You can't really move about quickly. Gaming performance is generally an area that iOS devices do very well in, and the iPhone 6 is no exception. I played a number of games, all of them felt really smooth to play. The effects looked fantastic, especially Modern Combat 5, although that did have a strange sky glitch that could be down to the new metal coding in iOS 8. Hopefully those bugs will get ironed out soon, but yeah, I was very impressed with the gaming here. I played for around 30 minutes straight and the device wasn't very warm at all afterwards. If mobile gaming is one of your main priorities when buying a new device, you should definitely take a look at the iPhone 6. Taking a quick look at the benchmarks, the iPhone does really well in the browser benchmark SunSpider with one of the best scores for a mobile device to date. 3D Mark was decent, but the Galaxy S5 actually scored higher with around the 18,000 mark. The Geekbench single score is very impressive. That's nearly 600 points higher than nearly every Android device out there. The multi-core score is pretty much on par with the Android flagships, so the Apple A8 chip, although being only dual-core, is quite the beast. Now moving on to the camera, it has the same megapixel count as last year's 5S, which was 8 megapixel. That's not the only similarity though, it has the same aperture and pixel size too, but it does have a new sensor with phase detection autofocus, which is actually really awesome. Coming up, you have a series of images taken with the iPhone 6 in the daytime. I'm no camera expert, but it seems to take very nice natural looking shots with plenty of colour and detail. This shot, I thought the camera got it perfectly. The colour reproduction was spot on with what I was seeing, not oversaturated or washed out. Next up, I zoomed in to see how well the 8 megapixel was holding up, and actually it did very well. Generally the edges of objects stayed pretty sharp and not much blur or fuzziness was introduced. It's only when you crop in quite far that you can start to really see the loss of quality, but this was quite an excessive test. Don't forget, this was the original shot, so that's actually quite impressive. Video recording was very respectable. I don't think it was quite as impressive as the stills. Sometimes it had a few problems with overexposing areas. Unfortunately, there's no optical image stabilization on the iPhone 6. That was reserved for the 6 Plus, but the digital stabilization does a pretty decent job. What's really impressive is the phase detection autofocus. It's incredibly quick. On some occasions I didn't even notice it focusing. There was no worry of my video being out of focus for a long period of time when going in for a close shot and then a long range shot, and it makes using this camera a breeze to use. The camera app itself has been updated a little bit. We can take a look at that here. In the bottom right hand corner you have filters. These are actually live. You can see the different effects they're having without actually selecting each one, so that's pretty cool. You have the auto HDR option at the top. You can choose to turn that off or just have it on for manual use. You have a timer as well, so you can set a certain time for the picture to actually take. And of course you can flick to the front facing camera, and you can also go ahead and set the flash to off or manual, whatever you want. Taking shots with this camera is just really easy. The phase detection really does focus very quickly, and you hardly have to retake your shot on this device because it is that quick, and most of the time your shot will be in focus, so that is impressive. We have some very Instagrammy filters built into the edit section now, so you can quickly apply a filter and then upload it to your favorite social network, whatever you want. You can also mess around with the white balance, you can change the color saturations and all that good stuff as well. Checking out the new modes, the slow-mo can record at 240 frames per second. That's double last year's frame rate, and it's a lot of fun to use. It should be noted you need to have a lot of light for this to work well. And lastly is a time-lapse feature, so you can watch the flowers grow and the clouds move. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of these slow-mos in action. I had a lot of fun with this feature while I was using the iPhone 6. It works so well, you can choose exactly which bits you want to slow down and which bits you want to speed back up. One thing to remember is this takes a fair bit more storage than recording normal 1080p footage, so make sure you have enough space. Lastly, the battery life. The iPhone 6 has a 1810 mAh battery, which isn't exactly the biggest compared with high-end Android phones, but different OSs work differently, especially when you're talking about running apps in the background and multitasking. With my usage on the iPhone 6, firstly on Wi-Fi, it easily got me through the day with no problems. A lot of the time I had around 30 to 40% left. Also, standby time was very good. It really sips battery when you're not using it much, depending on signal strength of course. On 3G and 4G, it still got me through the day, but sometimes with around 5 to 10% left, so if you're a heavy user or you watch a lot of videos and games when you're out and about, you might want to top up through the day because it probably won't make it. It's an improvement over the iPhone 5S, but not as good as the iPhone 6 Plus, which has a much larger battery. iOS 8 has a new battery usage area which breaks down the drain per app, which is fantastic. You can see exactly which apps are draining your battery over 24 hours and also over the last 7 days. You'll notice some say